This is what happens when an incel goes unchecked.
Right.
For 20 years in the woods, he's out there getting more and more mad. Ted Kaczynski, Uncle Ted, as many might know him, famous. I was having a debate with my girlfriend. Would you consider Ted Kaczynski a serial killer?
Well,
like, I don't think he fits. I don't think he fits the profile of a serial killer. Like, I think they're generally doing what they're doing for power or for some like sexual or sadomasochistic purpose, whereas he was someone that killed multiple people for a political cause or a social cause.
I have to disagree a little bit.
Okay.
If you paid close attention, there were, even early on in his writings, because he kept a journal basically his whole life. That's why we have so much information on him. Early on in his writings, in his younger days, even when he was in college, and he was in college when he was like 15 years old, he wrote about the desire to kill people and even talking pretty like in only the way that a serial killer would talk about these things. So I think it's my opinion that he had political excuses for his killings, but he was also sadistic as fuck. I think it was a culmination of multiple factors that leads to somebody like Kaczynski, in my opinion.
Yeah, I could completely agree. Like, so it was, we'll just get in. I'll go through it. Yeah, so Ted, he was born into a Polish working class family in 1942. Actually, I was going to pull up some pics real quick. Shit, that's not Ted. hang on. I got the wrong one. There we go. This is the correct one.
Looks about the same to me.
Yeah, a little bit. And then, of course, there's the famous picture. This really struck me, so I'm watching it, and there's some similarities, I'll say. With famous picture of Ted standing outside the cabin that he built with a green roof. Oh shit! And there we go. Maybe a little bit similar.
Huh?
I don't know. Yeah. Yeah. Mine's bigger, Ted. Sorry.
Looks inspired. Definitely inspired by, though.
I guess you know the story. Ted was labeled a genius in the 5th grade after scoring a 167 on an IQ test. Now, apparently he would take a test later in life after he was arrested, and I know you don't put a whole lot of stock in IQ tests, but I think later in life he took one and he scored like somewhere in the 130s. Most of the psychologists that were dealing with him were saying that was probably a little bit closer to correct. He wasn't the Hawking level super genius that the documentaries like to make him out to be.
He was still smart as fuck. He got into Harvard at 15 or some shit.
At 15, yeah. So he graduated high school at 15 to go on to Harvard. Yeah, his counselor wrote for his entrance letter, "I believe Ted has one of the greatest contributions to make to society. He is reflective, sensitive, and deeply conscious of his responsibilities to society." Yeah, there's a bunch of really kind of ironic and chilling statements from people back during that time about the great contributions he's going to make to society and his amazing future. But so at Harvard he met the acclaimed psychologist Henry Murray.
Was a participant in an unethical study conducted by Henry A. Murray, the Harvard professor and psychologist best known for pioneering personality tests. Before Harvard, Murray had been a colonel in the U.S. Army and an agent for the Office of Strategic Services, OSS, which later became known as the CIA. According to his colleagues at OSS, Murray was obsessed with mind control and used LSD among other drugs to determine how to brainwash subjects. There is no evidence to suggest Murray used LSD in his experiments with Kaczynski, though. The study was officially named Multiform Assessments of Personality Development Among Gifted College Men, and its purpose was to measure how the students reacted under stress. Subjects were told that they would be debating personal philosophies with other students and writing essays detailing their beliefs and their aspirations. The essays were then turned over to anonymous attorneys who conducted vehement, sweeping, and personally abusive interrogations. The participants wore electrodes to monitor their physiological responses, and the sessions were also filmed. Later, subjects' expressions of rage during the interrogations were repeatedly played back to them. Some sources have suggested that Murray's study was part of the federal government's research on mind control known as Project MKUltra. Author Alton Chase
Well, it was. He admitted that it was. Murray did.
He admitted that the experiment that he put Kaczynski through was part of the MK Ultra. I know that he had done work with MK Ultra in the past, or done work with the CIA in their MK Ultra program previously, but I was not able to find a link, and maybe it's out there. I just didn't see it.
He admitted this was part of his work for the CIA or for the OSS at the time.
Huh. Okay. Well,
there's no direct evidence that Kaczynski was given LSD, but he's never. I'm not sure if he's been asked about that.
Surely somebody'd ask him about it.
I would think so. Yeah.
I know. But yeah, so I know that come out, and I initially heard about that on Rogan years and years ago. Somebody come on, they were like, yeah, they fried Ted's brain with LSD back in the 60s. And unfortunately, it doesn't seem like there's any evidence of that. But yeah, what they did to him was pretty insane. You imagine
pretty fucked up for a 15-year-old.
15, 16-year-old kid, and hey, write down your ideals, your philosophy about life, and give that to lawyers to pick apart in the most kind of berating and demeaning way possible, and then video record you while it's happening, and then play back your feelings of anger and your I guess kind of emotional outbursts to you. I mean, that's, if there were something that were going to mess up a kid's psychology, like that certainly seems like it would be it, especially a 15-year-old kid that was pretty out of place to begin with.
It wasn't just a normal sort of critique of his philosophy. It was they intentionally were trying to psychologically harm him. Like if you listen to the interviews, they're like shitting on him basically, like calling his ideas dog just they were demeaning,
trying to be as demeaning as possible. It wasn't just, hey Ted, we think you're wrong here. It was, what kind of idiotic child would believe this kind of drivel, and
you're an imbecile and stuff like that. you have the mind of a child with these arguments.
But I don't certainly want to psychoanalyze, but there does seem to be a connection between these feelings of rage and anger that these experiments were supposed to elicit, and the anger he enacted later towards industrial society.
According to his friends at the time, he became very introverted right around the time that these experiments began. Could be unrelated. It could have been part of potentially creeping sort of schizophrenia. It's unclear, but...
Yeah, so it was also at this time, as you were mentioning this earlier, where he was first talking about having a desire to kill people. It was, I guess it was a couple years after this, when he went on to become a professor, and he started... I guess maybe he was you might classify him as an incel today. He was not having a whole lot of luck with the ladies, and he came to the conclusion at one point that the only way he'd be able to touch a woman was by becoming a woman himself, which is pretty big-brained, I have to admit.
One way to go about it.
That is one way to go about it.
Most people would just get a prostitute, but...
Yeah. So he actually spoke to a psychologist about it, and went to see a doctor for a sex change. I didn't know that they did sex changes this long ago. I mean, this was in the mid 60s at this point, but he went to a doctor to see about having a sex change while he was in the office, the waiting room, waiting to go back and talk to them. He chickened out, left, and then according to Ted, it was right around that time that he started having his first kind of inklings of murderous rage started welling up over this whole ordeal. But so at Harvard, he went on to study. After Harvard, he went on to study at the University of Michigan. He specialized in geometric function theory and wrote his dissertation on boundary functions to very high acclaim. His doctoral advisor remarked that his dissertation was the best I had ever directed, winning a prestigious prize for the best mathematics dissertation. Then, of course, he went on to become the youngest assistant professor in the history of Berkeley. So certainly the guy has his intellectual bona fides. He's went through all the channels, got all the acclaim.
He's a math whiz.
He's a math whiz, intelligent guy.
There was no indication that there was any sort of gender dysphoria going on though at any other point in the documentary that I saw. There was no women's dresses found in the cabin or anything. You know what I mean?
As a continuing thing.
Yeah, it didn't seem like he had gender dysphoria. It just seemed like he had this harebrained idea to get a sex change.
Yeah, that's what it seemed like. Yeah, it never come up again. It just like,
Right.
maybe maybe he just, honestly, that's what it was. Like, I couldn't get any. I wanted to grab some tits, and I just
Genius.
figured I'd get them.
This
Just
is how
get them on me.
It's how geniuses think.
We need to do the meme where it's like the small brain, little brain, it's like galaxy brain, like
Yeah.
sit at home and jerk off, get a
my own tits.
personality, get a personality, get my own tits.
Yeah.
Anyway, so I ended up downloading, and I've been reading and listening to Ted's essay, or commonly known as the manifesto. And this is, Industrial Society and Its Future. So that was the name of the manifesto. Apparently he does not like calling it a manifesto. He refers to it as an essay. But anyways, well, manifesto has such negative connotations.
Does now.
Does now. Do you remember when this happened? Do you remember when this all come out?
I was very young at the tail end of it.
Yeah, 95 was when they published the manifesto. And I think it was like April 96 is when they caught him. Yeah, I remember vaguely like this stuff happening, hearing about it. And when I was in 6th grade, so this might have been 97, I dressed up as the Unibomber for Halloween to go to school. Sam remembers this because he was up there at the time. But yeah, I had the glasses and I had the hoodie and the whole deal. So I've always been interested in this guy ever since then. But anyway, so I wanted to talk about some of the theories and ideas that he presents in the manifesto. And there's one in particular, about, I guess, modern leftism. So anyways, the psychology of modern leftism. So as I was reading through this, I saw a lot of applicability towards the whole woke debate that's going on right now. And it was interesting that a lot of these terms and ideals that I thought were a little bit more recent had been going on for a while. And I guess maybe Ted was just a little bit ahead of everybody else. So we'll go through this and I don't know, see if there's any merit to the ideas that he's espousing, and see if this is applicable today. Ted defines a leftist as an anti-individualistic, pro-collectivist. He wants society to solve everyone's problems for them, satisfy everyone's needs for them, take care of them. I don't know, do you think that's an agreeable assessment?
That sounds like a neocon.
A neocon?
That's something a neocon would say.
Oh, yeah, it sounds like one, yeah. Yeah, I don't know. I thought, interestingly, his use of the word society versus government, generally when the attack is levied from a right-wing perspective, you'll have the less personal use of the word government almost as a separate entity.
Government with a B.
Government, which it really is. I don't know. Society, I thought, was a much more fair categorization.
Sure, I guess.
So Ted defines leftists as mainly socialist, collectivist, politically correct types, feminist, gay, disability activists, animal rights activists, and the like. Now, he's not talking necessarily about the movement or the ideology, but the people that follow, the people that partake in these ideologies as a psychological type. Also, when he's referring to leftists, he confines his definition to modern movements and not those of the 19th and early 20th centuries. I think he says that that's still up for grabs on whether or not they would be leftist under his definition. Psychological leftist, I guess we'll say. Here's a quote from Ted. The leftist is oriented toward large-scale collectivism. He emphasizes the duty of the individual to serve society and the duty of society to take care of the individual. He has a negative attitude toward individualism. He often takes a moralistic tone. He tends to be for gun control, for sex education, and other psychologically enlightened education methods, for social planning, for affirmative action, for multiculturalism. He tends to identify with victims. He tends to be against competition and against violence, but he often finds excuses for those leftists who do commit violence. He's fond of using the common catchphrases of the left, like racism, sexism, homophobia, capitalism, imperialism, neocolonialism, social change, social justice, social responsibility. Maybe the best diagnostic trait of the leftist is his tendency to sympathize with the following movements: feminism, gay rights, disability. Anyone who strongly sympathizes with all these movements is almost certainly a leftist.
So he's defining leftist by instead of defining the term, just like putting anything into a bucket called leftism.
Yeah, he's getting at what he would refer to as a psychological type. my reading of him is he's less concerned with the ideals and the actual movements. And he goes on to say that, there's nothing wrong with feminism, anti-racist movements, yada, yada, but that the psychological type of the people that get engrossed in these kind of movements is he feels like a symptom of the larger problem, which is the technological system that we're all trapped in. And these would all be surrogate activities, according to Ted. So these are things that people partake in because they don't have real meaningful activities to engage in.
He probably feels like they don't have the true understanding of what's wrong with the system, basically.
Yeah.
Which is what how most people feel.
Yeah, so Ted's issues aren't necessarily with the ideas, but the motivating psychology to push people into these ideals, the collectivist mentality that wants all problems to be solved on a communal level, regardless of whether that problem needs to be solved on a communal level. Ted identifies 2 pervasive negative psychological traits that develop as a result of the growing technological advancement of society. This is what I want to look into. So first off, we have feelings of inferiority. So this is the whole chapter of the manifesto. I got a little clip to start it off.
I've read this thing, but it's been so long, man. And I remember not being overly impressed by it.
Yeah, there's some interesting ideas.
He's clearly not an expert in poli-sci, right?
He's clearly not. But I don't think, he's not taking the approach from a poli-sci perspective, though. I think, to be fair to Ted, we certainly want to be fair to Ted. Or he's seeing all these things as, I guess, kind of like secondary issues to the real problem and distractions from the real problem. But
the former is a trait that is often found in hypersensitive minority rights activists who seek to radically limit speech that they deem to be offensive. He identifies low self-esteem and powerlessness as the origin for these zealous positions. To find up-to-date examples for this sort of behavior, one must look no further than to Black Lives Matter or LGBT activists who continually obstruct discourse in the name of social justice. The most extreme activists among them are overwhelmingly university-educated, white heterosexual upper-middle-class males who defend minority groups precisely because they see them as inferior and therefore identify with them.
Yeah, so feelings of inferiority. He's talking about this. He's not just being feeling inferior, but the spectrum of related traits. So low self-esteem, feelings of powerlessness, defeatism, guilt, etc. Now, if this doesn't perfectly categorize much of congressional Democrats, and I don't know what does. There's no word more synonymous with the Democratic Party than defeatism. Their inability to get by hardly any legislative accomplishments, and when they do, they're so completely watered down that they might as well just be nothing. We saw this with Build Back Better, meaningful gun legislation, Democrats' inability to protect basic government programs like Social Security. Did you hear who Biden just nominated to be in charge of Social Security?
Yeah, I saw the article.
After the Roe announcement just come out, the Roe v. Wade being struck down, we had all the Democratic congressional lawmakers that went outside the Capitol to hold hands and sing God Bless America. And I was thinking of that as I was reading this, about these just low self-esteem, powerless, defeatist, self-guilt. I don't know.
As the nuclear bomb that is obliterating the entire planet drops, they're holding hands, singing.
They're holding hands.
God bless America.
Yeah, somebody made a comment that they're like the band on the Titanic, except if everybody in the band knew how to fix the ship or had the power to fix the ship, but instead they just wanted to play music while the ship went down. Okay. Anyway. Yeah. So this is why leftists want to have membership in large organizations or movements. An example of this feeling of inferiority is the constant desire to defend the weak. Here's another piece by Kaczynski. When someone interprets as derogatory almost anything, I should have had a good Kaczynski accent to try to do. Worked on it before I started this. But when someone interprets as derogatory almost anything that is said about him, we conclude that he has inferiority feelings or low self-esteem. This tendency is pronounced among minority rights activists. Whether or not they belong to minority groups whose rights they defend, they are hypersensitive about the words used to designate minorities and about anything that is said concerning minorities. The terms Negro, Oriental, handicap, or chick for an African, an Asian, a disabled person, or a woman originally had no derogatory connotation. Broad and chick were merely the feminine equivalents of guy, dude, or fellow. The negative connotations have been attached to these terms by the activists themselves. I guess this is kind of like the early days of, I mean, this really was the early days of the politically correct movement when people started really policing speech at this point, right? This is the mid-90s.
Yeah, this is a very primitive sort of understanding of wokeness and the social justice crap that we all despise. This is, in my opinion, this is a very sort of primitive understanding. We have a better understanding of it nowadays, I think.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. And just the anachronistic, like he's still getting upset about the word Negro. Like you lost that war, buddy. That one's long gone in polite
Since
society.
when are there negative connotations around the word chick? I still use that word.
I don't know. I think that's like I've heard stuff like this in certain feminist, I guess from certain feminist organizations where they're trying to, or they would like to get rid of these, I don't know, different feminine phrases for women. I guess they feel it's misogynistic or demeaning. I mean, it didn't really go anywhere, but certainly there are certain groups that would want to push for this language policing.
I would just say, just for the listeners, like the wokeness and the policing of speech and all these type of social justice activities that go on in college campuses is the result of people not having a understanding or a grounded base of knowledge in materialism, right? They don't understand that the material conditions underlie social disparities. They think they think racism itself is the cause of, for example, the racial wealth gap, which isn't the case at all. It's material conditions. Racism is just a byproduct. But they don't have that material. They don't have that understanding, the basic Marxist materialist understanding of the world.
Sure. And it's also, it's pretty apparent that Ted didn't either.
Yeah.
Like I said, all this is pretty sophomoric, I guess, be the best way to put it.
He has good instincts, though, I think.
That's what I was going to say, his intuitions. I think a lot of his intuitions are on point. They really need fleshing out and a better understanding of, what you were just saying, better understanding of material conditions and kind of the poli-sci background on how to assess these issues. But so this is why we have upper and middle class kids, white kids, wanting to defend and perhaps being the predominant defenders of LGBT or inner city people. I don't think this is anything. I don't think this is anything out of the ordinary, right? Like, have you seen this? I feel like I've seen it. It's something I've kind of chuckled about throughout the years. So whenever I have been to these left-wing gatherings, it's filled with all sorts of people, but there are always in the positions of leadership, and the majority of the people there are like upper and middle class white people, like the people that are I guess least oppressed, and I don't know, they always seem to be. It's like I guess this is what the liberal guilt is that you hear about. Like they are expressing the liberal guilt, that comes with this. Well,
from a materialist perspective, the argument is these are the people who are wealthy and have the time and the ability to travel to these fucking protests.
Yeah, man, certainly that's part of it. There seems to be a bit more of a, I don't know, maybe it's just college educated people. There's a bit more of a social awareness, and that's what causes these things to be predominantly wealthy white people. I know, like I said, when I went to the Breonna Taylor protest in March up in Louisville, I mean, we're right there in Louisville. It was more than half white people, and they were like young white people. So, large black community, obviously, there. They certainly showed up, but most of the people there were like college students or people in their 20s or 30s, white people.
All the black people are off, like, spending all their welfare checks and smoking crack, right? Is that what it is?
Obviously. I would be, too, if I had a welfare check to spend. Anyway, so Ted's assessment of why leftists always want to champion these different minority groups is that leftists view these people as inferior, and they identify, so I guess two parts. They view them as inferior, and they identify with that inferiority. This is from Kaczynski again. Many leftists have an intense identification with the problems of groups that have an image of being weak women, defeated American Indians, repellent homosexuals, or otherwise inferior. The leftists themselves feel that these groups are inferior. They would never admit to themselves that they have such feelings, but it is precisely because they do see these groups as inferior that they identify with their problems. We do not mean to suggest that women, Indians, etc. are inferior. We're only making a point about the leftist psychology.
Yeah, this is a great
So-
point. I've heard this exact same point from modern leftists, like people like Bhaskar Sankara. This is a pretty solid critique of liberalism.
Yeah. Feminists want to prove women are as strong and capable as men because they fear that they may not be. This is what we see play out in modern woke cinema, for example. There's this clear effort made to make women strong, capable, and self-reliant in an overt way. And it almost suggests that they feel like they will not be strong and confident and capable if they're not made overtly that through the medium of whatever art it is that they're putting out. You can't just do a Sarah Connor, just a badass chick. You have to have a Rey Skywalker or whatever. So it is this psychological self-hatred that drives leftists to hate America, Western civilization, white males. To have succeeded, one must have somehow, somewhere suppressed someone else. I've been listening to two people all week, Ted Kaczynski and Slavoj Žižek. What a combination they've made.
Experienced the same situation already 25 years ago at a very politically correct conference where white liberals were excelling each other into who will humiliate himself more. We are to blame everything. Oh, Eurocentrism, we brought slavery, it's nightmare, we are guilty of everything. Christianity, the worst one, it was invented to screw other races and so on and so on. And then a black friend of mine, not to embarrass him, I will not mention his name. Well, wait a minute, guys, we are not so innocent. We also had our own Louis Farrakhan, black racism and so on. And I noticed that the mighty white liberal professors exchanged these embarrassed gazes, which meant precisely, no, sorry, guy, we are to blame. We are nothing. Who are you to say that you are also nothing? The message was clear. Precisely when white liberals humiliate themselves, and I notice this again and again, like, we are worthless, we don't have the right, that's subtle racism expressed in this forum.
That was Slavoj Žižek. He is very upset about reverse racism, as am I.
He's sort of making the same point that Kaczynski's making here.
Yeah, making the exact same point. It's this it's a psychological tendency that exists in certain leftists for kind of this self-hatred and self-deprecation, or this apprehension to, I guess, give non-minority peoples any credit in any situation. Obviously, it's not endemic. It's just certain people. But it is a psychological type that's pretty identifiable.
Yeah, fucking liberals. We have a term for this in the hood. It's called Captain Save-A-Ho. Everybody's trying to play Captain Save-A-Ho.
Yeah, so there, Zizek talking about this kind of tendency for self-hatred, self-deprecation amongst these white liberals going on. So they say they hate the West because it is warlike, imperialistic, sexist. But when these same faults appear in socialist countries, they make excuses. I immediately thought of somebody like Hassan when I read this part, where he just wants to, I guess, make excuses. I mean, well, we saw this with the whole Russia thing, where he was equating anti-U.S. with anti-imperialist. So Russia must be doing something good or must not be completely bad because the U.S. is opposed to them. This a lot.
I would disagree with that take. I would say that it's okay to try and provide more context to what's going on in Russia and Ukraine right now without being a tanky. Like you can say, hey, how about 2014 Maidan? There's other things going on than just these things don't happen out of context. Everything's in context of the history. Sure.
And I'm always a fan for adding more context to anything. I don't think that's what Hassan was interested in doing. And of course, you also you see this a lot with the Cuban Revolution, for example. I mean, obviously, I guess I'd be a supporter of the Cuban Revolution, but I've read people that really try to whitewash and downplay the atrocities and the negative aspects of that revolution after the fact. It's a weird.
It's like rose-colored glasses, right? You always, I don't know. There is a point there that, yeah.
It's an opposition. It's this overt opposition to anything Western, just to be opposed to Western, just because that's the more powerful side. That's the side with all the power, and you want to oppose power, so you support anything that is against power.
There is always a strain in any discussion of I'm more counterculture than you. That there's
Yeah.
always that strain.
I mean, that's tankies, right? You know, they're
It's not just
they're wanting to
tankies,
go
like-
one step forward.
There's even people to the to more extreme than tankies, you know.
Well, sure. Yeah. So the conclusion is that leftists don't hate the West for the reasons given. They hate the West because it is successful, and this is what leftists hate more than anything: is successful people, successful
jeez.
entities.
This take, I don't know about, buddy. I don't know about this take.
Don't let your address be public knowledge. Then might be getting a little package from old Teddy. Yeah. So I certainly don't think that Ted's characterization of the left is complete or absolute or necessarily even meaningful in the way that we would view the left, but it does seem to hit a vein, one that's been around for a while, apparently. This is the characterization of the left that exists, and it exists for a reason. The broad themes that Kaczynski touched on show up through a kind of wide swath of liberals. So in 95, Ted would have been reacting to what he was seeing during the height of Clintonism. This was pure neoliberalism. If I can look inside Ted's mind for a minute, in the Marxist vocabulary, Ted will look at all these issues as just bourgeois concerns. The leftist views himself as a rebel, yet he rebels within the technological system. The technological system doesn't care what religion you are, as long as progress marches forward. The technological system doesn't concern itself with petty sexual or racial differences, just as long as people can get along well enough to perpetuate that system. So I think that's his ultimate take on all this stuff, is that all these concerns that people get really invested in are tertiary to the main issue, which is perpetuating a technological system that is much more harmful to society than people realize, and that it overwhelms the amount of good that it does for society.
Yeah, Ted he's an anarcho-primitivist, basically, which is it just him conflating capitalism with technological advancement, because those two things are not the same? Is it that, or is it, you know, he's always had this sort of anti-technological vein to his writing, it seems like, even in way back in his early days.
Yeah, I don't know. So what do you think? I think the level of sophistication that Ted would like to see us at, from what I can understand, is like early 1800s, like pioneer Western settler, that kind of level of technological development. How do you feel about that? Somebody that's very tuned in.
My opinion on if
are
that's
you ready?
what.
Are you ready when the system comes down? When Ted brings the system down, are you going to be ready? Are you going to be okay? Are you going to be happy to live in a system at that level of technological development?
Well, first of all, I yearn for the Armageddon to come. I love post-apocalyptic shit. That's my jam. I would love nothing more. I would love nothing more than to tear all this shit down and start from scratch. But just if we're going to talk about policy and what's ideal for society, I don't think getting rid of vaccinations and Madame Curie and all the gains we've made as a society, I think this is all leading to something, hopefully, some sort of post-Earth society, interstellar travel, eternal life. These are the things that we're pushing towards here with the technology. And the scientific community is not in any way reliant upon capitalism to exist. We can tear down the capitalist system, form the municipal type society that Ted is talking about here, that we used to have, small communities working together in cooperation to form a society. We can do all that without the dominance of capitalists owning everything.
Yeah, that would definitely be a big step forward. I know he talks about just
That's what I didn't get. That's what I don't get out of Ted. I don't understand what his argument is. Why? Why is technology the problem? Does he ever state that explicitly?
Oh, yeah. So he gives a couple examples. He talks about cars, for example. So people have cars. It's this amazing technology. It allows you to get places quicker, allows you freedom of movement. But as that technological system progresses, the cars end up becoming mandatory, which means you have to have a car, which means you have to be able to, a portion of your labor has to go towards providing yourself with a car, and you have to have insurance, and that money goes towards that. And so your freedoms in not having a car are limited by society reorganizing itself to have that technology be so pervasive. And even if you decide not to, then you're still going to be affected by it. These roads are going to be everywhere. You're still going to be constrained in your movement by the traffic laws as a pedestrian. And then, of course, the long-term consequences of the pollution caused by these sorts of technologies. And that's what he's concerned with, is that with every great technological advance, all these constraints and kind of shackles are added to each individual that is causing an incredible amount of stress, depression, suicide, environmental destruction. And those seem to be his big concerns. I guess you could say the same thing about phones. We have social media. Anywhere we can stay in contact with anyone, we get all the latest news. But do the positives of having access to the world at your fingertips outweigh the negatives of the increased depression, increased stress, wasted time? You lose how many countless hours staring at your phone for information that really is meaningless. And I think Ted's doing an arithmetic there, and he finds that the benefits are not outweighing the negatives to any of these technologies. And of course, also with phones, like you're kind of compelled to have one, which means you're going to have to spend a certain amount of your labor to have a phone, to buy it, to pay for it, and to
sure, but
stay in the system.
Technology multiplies the productive capacity of human beings by exponential amounts. Like productivity has gone up tremendously since the Industrial Revolution, simply because machines can make shit faster than humans can make it. That's why we have such a higher standard of living. It's because of the technology. Cars are shit, phones, the internet, it's questionable. If we can't regulate this some way and prevent disinformation, then maybe it's not an overall benefit. But theoretically, it should be. It's democratizing, at least, or it should be.
Yeah, I really think that the answer is, I guess, further democratization of the workplace and of the economy. This is something you've kind of talked about. Our capitalistic system, you're producing so much excess, and all that excess is just going to the top. And if we kind of spread it out amongst everyone else, I think the arithmetic of the benefits to the negatives kind of goes in the other direction a little bit. I think it's a real thing that people don't think about when you're buying something. How much of your time, if I go buy a brand new car, how much of my labor, how much of my time that I have on this earth is that going to cost me to pay that thing off? How many hours does it take to pay off a brand new $50,000 truck? And you have to pay for gas, and you have to pay for insurance. But these things could be cheaper. We could not be giving large portions of the value of these products to the wealthiest members of society, and then it would significantly cut back on the individual time investment that each person has to make. Well, trying to meet you halfway, Ted.
You redistribute that labor value, redistribute it more equitably, and that solves the problem. His environmental concerns are his biggest argument, in my view, and the answer to that, again, is you take control of the system. There's no reason that technology has to be destructive. It can also clean up the environment.
Yeah.
If you point it in that direction, it's just a tool. We didn't really talk about his bombings, but he started off just bombing like university professors and shit that he didn't like. He had some history with some of them, I think, at first, didn't he?
I don't know. I don't think he had any personal history with any of them.
His last bombing was the only one where I was like, yeah, that's a pretty good bombing. He bombed like the advertising exec for like Exxon.
Yeah.
I was like, that's probably justifiable. The rest of them are really dumb.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah, he was bombing. I think some of his earlier bombings were like scientists that were working on gene therapies.
Yeah.
He went after some like forestry executives. I guess we would call it forestry, logging executives.
It didn't seem that thought out. It seemed more like he just wanted to kill people.
Yeah.
Or like, I don't know.
So I've been kind of going back and forth with my girlfriend over this because she's concerned with how much I've been talking about Ted recently and pointing out the similarities between us.
Shoot him a letter.
I was thinking about it. I was actually just looking that up a little bit ago. He's like 80 years old now, and I'm sure he gets a lot of letters.
I imagine.
That would be cool. It'd be cool to have a handwritten letter from Ted Kaczynski.
Fuck yeah.
But so we've already went over this. I think he made some great points, but it was just, there was a lot of anger. There was a lot of frustration. And I think that really overshadows the message that he was trying to get out. Like, I don't think there's anything inherently wrong with what he's saying for the most part. Yeah, I don't know. I wouldn't agree with him on everything, obviously, but I certainly think he makes a lot of great points. And I don't have any issue with violence in the pursuit of a noble goal if the damage done by the violence is going to be less than the damage done by not doing the violence. But I don't see how any scenario where that arithmetic works out in what he was doing. He was going after like mid-level scientists and professors and all that. And it really just, it seemed like it was just anger kind of being unleashed on the world. Like he could have picked some better people if he was going to do it.
Right. All in all, I think, he had some good intuitions. Just, it seemed like there was definitely some sort of sickness going on. I don't know. It was another scenario like Anders Breivik, where he was arguing in court that he wasn't crazy.
Yeah.
Pretty strange.
Never a good look. Never a good look. Well, his lawyers like really screwed him over. They got him to, because he specifically did not want to go for the insanity defense, because that would negate his life's work if he got up there and they were trying to say he's insane.
He was going to get the death sentence.
Yeah, but he didn't care about that. He cared about, and respect to him for this, he valued his life's work and the message over his own life. And but apparently his lawyers had pulled kind of some shady maneuvers where they got the authority to pursue the insanity defense without, I guess, having to get his okay or something. I don't know. It was a big issue at the time.
No, I thought he took a plea deal. He wound up taking a plea deal.
He ended up taking a plea deal. Yeah. But initially they were going to move ahead with the insanity defense. And I believe that's a lot of the reason he took the plea deal, was because if he went to trial, it was going to be, they were just going to claim he was insane, and they were going to have his mom and his brother come in there, and everybody was going to say he's insane. And, they were going to pick through the manifesto.
Should have stuck to math. Let's just get all these math guys a prostitute whenever they need it. We don't need this.
This is what happens when an incel goes unchecked.
Right.
For 20 years in the woods, he's out there getting more and more mad. God damn it. Why didn't I just get that sex change 20 years ago?
So the FBI needed to unscramble a code that the National Security Agency would later describe as
one of the most sophisticated codes they had ever seen.
That's how they get you. They're under the goddamn